Hi, everybody. I'm Piper Thunstrom. I'm a software developer at GLG. It's a professional learning company. I'm also the owner and primary maintainer of Pursued PyBear that you can get with pip install ppb. And you can find me as PA Thunstrom, basically anywhere on the web, but the important ones are Twitter, Google, and GitHub. There's a couple of disclaimers for this talk. I'm sure if you've read the full title, this is about my experience as a trans person in tech. But this talk is not Gender 101. It's not Trans Topics 101. This is just my experiences and ways that community organizers can improve their communities for people like me. A key idea, though, is that trans people as a whole are not a monolithic entity, and things that are good for me might not be good for other trans members of the community. So it's definitely good to go and get other ideas about how this works. Naomi Cedar actually has a great talk on almost this exact topic. And the reality is that intersectionality is hard, and again, what is good for me is not good for everyone else. Our story actually starts with another me.
Your slide hasn't changed yet.
I know.
Oh.
I am aware. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
I joined New York City Python in the middle of about 2014, so almost 5 years ago now. When I joined, I was brand new to the community, but I was encouraged to submit a talk to a little conference we call PyGotham. I actually gave that talk, and it's still available. Please don't share this slide in your Twitter photos. There's actually a reason for that we will get into, but you can still go find this talk. Not long after I gave this talk, I started to transition publicly. It started with a name. Names are hard, as we all know, and changing names isn't easy, especially not nearly as easy as it is to rename something in Python. But to trans people, names are important. It's a way that we can express ourselves to show a side of us that most people don't get to see or can't understand. Mostly because we've picked these names. Now, most of us call our old name a dead name, and it reminds us it's often painful to be called by it. So the fact that I am showing it to you here is actually a fairly important thing. They often remind us of bad periods of our lives where we were not able to be ourselves. Sorry. When I came out, the first question I got was, should we change the names on your videos? We're talking 30 seconds from the moment I mentioned this to someone to me getting asked this question. As you saw, I chose not to do that, but that was a signal to me that I had made a good choice, both in coming out and the community that I associated myself with. Now, if anyone has ever seen the article, Falsehoods Programmers Believe About Names, there's two that are really important to people like me. Number 7 says, people's names do not change. And the following one is, people's names change, but only at certain enumerated sets of events. It's an incredibly common misconception, and it actually gets codified in services like Google and Facebook, and even Blizzard with their Battle.net real name policies. These policies make it so that if you ever change your name, you have to have a legal name change in order to change it on the system. I don't know if anyone here has ever tried to do a legal name change, but they are expensive, and they are time-consuming, and they are often frustrating. And the reality is that not everyone uses legal names. Many people go by their middle name or a nickname in their everyday life. The takeaway I want you to understand here is names change. What you consider someone's real name may not be the one that they use for themselves. And so when we start building systems that assume that a name doesn't change or applies universally, we create systems that make it very hard for people like myself. And the reality is that this actually costs our community talent. I have a friend who does not contribute to open source anymore because most of her contributions are under names she doesn't want to be associated with. And because she can't change it, because Git puts it into a commit hash, she just doesn't join the community anymore. As time went on, I became a more recognized member of the community. People actually knew my name. But it was also a kind of a messy part of my transition. I was what I refer to as visibly trans. This isn't actually a problem. There's a lot of people who are visibly trans and enjoy that about themselves. But what it can do is create these tense situations. One day we were having a circle discussion with a big mix of new members and experienced members of our Python community. And in the middle of the conversation, another person turned to me and asked me what my pronouns were. I want to be absolutely clear. If you're unsure of what pronouns to use for a person, please ask them. But maybe consider how you ask them. In this case, it stopped a conversation cold and outed me to a number of other people who didn't know me yet. And it sounds like a little thing, considering this is the Python community, and I wouldn't be giving this talk if it weren't, a little safe. But I have a number of horror stories that start with a stranger coming up to me in public and going, "Are you a man or a woman?" One of them, one of the most memorable ones, in fact, happened one stop away in Times Square on the subway platform. Being outed as trans can be a very real physical threat. We can make this safer for our communities. We can create a culture of asking where it happens in the course of things. We can put our pronouns on name badges or put them on our profiles. And it doesn't even need to be 100% of the time. Just a little of this is enough to make it safer for the people who need it. At the same time, there are people who don't use traditional pronouns that asking regularly actually makes it harder for them. Non-binary people and genderqueer people who might change their pronouns based on the day might not be comfortable revealing that to a community. The takeaway is if you need to ask, and let's be real, you're going to need to ask a lot more than you think. Please do it privately so as not to embarrass or out your community members. This next section is a little interesting. As I leveled up as a developer, I got to move from shop to shop and experience more the ways different people develop software. But I was doing this as I was transitioning, so I got to see subtle changes in the way different people treated me over time. This actually created stumbling blocks in my career. I went from a man in tech to a woman in tech, and gender bias is a very real thing. As I transitioned and I got better as a technologist, the ways I would get critiqued would change. So despite having a stronger understanding of the code, the critiques would be about less important elements of it. At one job, there was an example of this where I had a very small, simple task that when I first put in the PR was 100 lines of code. This is with the test, so we're talking a very simple thing. 6 weeks later, when it finally got accepted, almost every member of my team had commented dozens of times on the work. The scope tripled. And the final PR was almost 1,000 lines of code. Now, we had to go over this in a postmortem because when you go that far over schedule, something's wrong. And the thing that was most interesting to me is we found that despite this being a fairly easy job, this had one of the most amount of actual churn of different comments on it than almost anyone else in the company. We had much larger work with much more important things that didn't have nearly as much conversation about them. Now, I'm not saying that this is like clear-cut or that it was a malicious happening. None of us expected this to happen. It was frustrating for everyone involved. It's just a real thing that happens with real people when subtle biases cause friction that costs us real time. the takeaway is be aware of these subtle biases, because you can't really get rid of them. Unfortunately, it's a social thing, but you can work around them as long as you're aware of them. Now, I'm an organizer, as you can tell from the yellow shirt. I was on the planning committee for this conference, and while I was on the committee, I actually pitched this talk very early on to a handful of people in private, just as this is an idea I've been thinking about for a while. Despite asking 4 or 5 different people, there was only one piece of feedback that I actually got. Absolutely submit that talk. Obviously, I submitted that talk. It was really telling to me, though, that a talk like this that has actually 0 technical discussion was such a popular idea. There was a strong response, and the other organizers don't really have my perspective on this topic, so it was good for me to hear that it was a perspective that was valued. The real takeaway is that valuing diverse outlooks is a critical piece of making your community welcoming. Especially for trans people, who we don't actually get to see ourselves as leaders very often because of the various forms of transphobia that keep us out of leadership positions. But that's actually not where the committee ended. I also helped on the diversity committee this year, where we reached out to all sorts of diversity groups to invite them to submit proposals and come to the conference. And then when we were doing the programming committee, where we were selecting talks, one of the things we focused on was getting more women speakers to the final step. And really, this kind of encouragement has continued even outside of my leadership responsibilities. I've had peers and mentors in numerous communities. Ask me to spread this talk specifically, but my perspective overall, to more conferences, including PyCon. I will admit that encouragement actually makes me more likely to take the time to shop this to these other conferences. Now, unfortunately, encouragement's not the only step that community leaders need to take. There are a number of bad actors out there that will make it so minority voices silence themselves instead of being silenced. In many of the communities I've been in where this has happened, the rules change from deal with it yourself all the way up to a well-defined code of conduct like we have here at PyGotham. In almost every community, you will eventually have bad actors, and they will force you to test those standards. For example, with me, I've been in communities where I've been called a man to my face. I've also had my mental health questioned when it's not even part of the conversation. And in some communities, this is allowed. The benefit of the doubt is provided to the people who do things like this. And eventually you just stop talking because you know that that's the response you're going to get. In others, though, the community standards or a code of conduct is invoked almost immediately, and either other members or the leadership correct and then remove people who do things like this. And they had to act before those actions silenced me and pushed me from the community. My takeaway here is all groups should be explicit about their codes of conduct, and they should take them seriously and take action with them. If you need help with that, there's a number of great examples, from PyGotham's to the one I use in my open source project, the Contributor Covenant. Now, this is the part where I'm going to get a little bit meta and actually talk about this talk itself. As I said, when I came up with this talk, it was kind of a gimmick with a very important point. As you can see, I've kind of taken the gimmick. This is not a gimmicky talk anymore. But as I went to write it, I had to contend with some really hard questions. For example, in the one picture slide that I gave you, my dead name is available. And that's a deeply personal choice, and I want to be clear here. I don't use that name anywhere. The number of people at my current company who knows what that name is, I can count on one hand. I've discussed experiences and challenges and successes that are important to me. And I can only do this because this community feels safe. I can bear these parts of myself without danger. And that's an important quality that needs to be created. I'm now going to open for questions because I know that this is a little fast and a big topic. I'm going to say, don't worry if you think your question is too simple or possibly offensive. But I will choose not to answer certain questions, either because it's not something I want to discuss on stage, or it's a question that I don't feel me answering is useful. But other than that, please ask your questions. Thank you.
I'm Sumana, and I'm basically just the Q&A moderator for this section. So if people have questions to share, then I'll just sort of check on them and phrase them and repeat them for the audio for Piper. So we can take, does anyone have anything to start with? Hey there.
Hey. You told the anecdote of having like every member of your team comment on your code review, and that's an event that I've heard from a number of women in tech, of having people pile on code reviews in an unusual way that their male colleagues don't experience. I'm wondering if you think that like, if there are ways that organizations can do code reviews that particularly protect members of underrepresented groups from this this occurring event.
So Jesse's question is about the anecdote that Piper told of having some bike shedding happen where a pull request that was quite short got piled on with a tremendous number of critical comments. Jesse noted that he's heard about this kind of thing happening to a number of women in tech and wonders if there are things that organizations can do in the structure of how we do code reviews, if I understand correctly, to better protect members of underindexed, underrepresented groups in tech from this kind of thing happening to reviews of their work. Is that about right?
So that company specifically, without going into too much detail, we'd had this problem multiple times. This was just the worst example of it. And basically what had to happen is we had to make it clear that code reviews were two people, and those two people were picked by the person who wrote the code with an eye to which other people in the company should be working on that with you. So it was a very intentional thing, and by limiting it to two, it allowed us to have a focused grouping. Unfortunately, that every now and then it would slip, and we would have situations like that. So I think that's the best way to put it, is formalizing your code review process in a way that someone's responsible, and that would be my best bet.
Thanks, Piper. Just to note, we have 5 more minutes for Q&A. And also, Piper is interested in and available for conversations during the break after that and during the rest of the conference as well, in case you'd prefer to talk privately. Yeah. But we have 5 more minutes before the break for Q&A, so do we have any other questions? I see us, thank you, yes, that hand there.
Yeah, first of all, I sincerely applaud you for giving this talk. It's a hugely valuable thing to do. My question is also around found any particularly effective ways to bring up some of these biases to sort of help the community around you, in addition to systems like this that, like, I guess, like help move hold these forward?
Thank you. So the audience member wanted to sincerely thank and applaud you for giving this talk here, and I'm going to second that. And, but also they asked if you have found any effective ways to move the conversation and move the culture within organizations that you've worked with when it comes to the issues, the transphobia issues that Piper brought up. Is that about right? Great.
So the reality is that the subtle bias problem is, I deal with it on a regular basis. It's a problem I have with myself. And so giving an actual solution outside of just, I have to be very mindful of my own actions and my own thoughts, and encouraging other people to do so is pretty much the only solution I have. But that actually goes a long way.
That's the size of it? That's where you want to leave that particular one?
I'm not.
It's cool. It is. That's fine. I just wanted to check. All right. We have time for at least one, maybe a few more. Hi. Yes, go ahead.
Hi. If I were to throw a hypothesis that every person has like a way of thinking, but that in some ways men and women can have different things.
I don't think we're going to address that one.
Yeah, that one.
But thank you for considering it. Do you want to sort of talk about why you're not going to talk about that?
So that actually goes into a really, really complex space. That really, those two topics I said I didn't want to talk about, we're talking years of study to truly understand that question. And I can try to summarize it off camera, but it's just a big topic, is a lot of
Yeah, we don't have that. But thank you for asking and like beginning and bringing it up. That was completely fine to do.
Yep.
Hi.
Are you looking forward to doing this talk at Python?
So Piper is being asked by a kind and enthusiastic person whether she is looking forward to giving this talk at PyCon.
I mean, the talk hasn't been submitted yet, so I mean, the thought stresses me out a bit, but we'll see.
I appreciated that. I think we have time for at least one more. It's 5:20 by my watch. Thank you. Yes?
First of all, thank you, as many others have expressed. Thank you for sharing this. Now, let's suppose that there were, somebody maybe watching the video saying that they're interested in, transitioning in, say, a tech-related field. What lessons what recommendations might you give to them based on your experience?
So I'm going to repeat the question for the audio, if that's okay.
Right.
But I appreciate your enthusiasm at answering this audience member's question. The audience member thanked you again for giving this talk and also suggested that there could be a hypothetical person viewing this perhaps on video who might be thinking about beginning that journey of transition while working in a tech-related field, and asked what, being in tech, I should say, because, perhaps studying or not working, but, and asked what maybe lessons learned you have that you could draw from your experience that you would share with this viewer. Is that about right? Thank you.
All right, so the reality of this question, one, I think I'm both a good and bad model. When I first decided to transition, I told a number of people that I was going to take it slow. It didn't go slow. I was out and living publicly within 6 months, and I just kind of went all in.
I'm sorry, I'm going to ask a clarification. What would slow mean, you think?
I know people who have taken many years to come out publicly. So slow is really dependent on the person, but 6 months is a very fast amount of time from when I realized that I was trans and that this is a thing I need to do to actually being out in public. And professionally as well. So my advice is very hard to give from my perspective because, again, I went all in and I know that this isn't successful for everyone. But I will say that despite all of the difficulty surrounded my transition, it's been worth every minute. And I think that's the easiest way for me to put it, is that it's going to be hard, but sometimes you got to take a chance.
And you're also available to chat privately during this conference, including during the break that starts now, right? Yep. So Wayne, that's about it, right, in terms of time? Yeah. Thank you all, and thank you, Piper.